Welcome to Cannabis 360, your source for cannabis and psychedelic industry news, interviews, and insights. Visit canna360.ca and sign up to receive free access to the entire Cannabis 360 catalog. In this episode of High Fidelity, we speak with Owen Allerton, CEO of Highland Cannabis, a top 10 cannabis retailer located in Kitchener, Ontario. Owen has become a critical voice for independent retailers, recently launching Cancel Kickbacks, an initiative that consists of independent licensed cannabis retailers who are shedding light on the issue of illegal inducements disguised as data sales, arguing that they enable predatory pricing and provide certain retailers with an unfair advantage. Owen highlights the detrimental effect these kickbacks are having on the viability of independent retailers and their ability to compete with larger chains. Hi, Owen. How are you today?
Fantastic. How you doing?
Yeah, doing well. Thank you for asking. So, really excited for our conversation today. I think it's a really important topic that we're going to be chatting about here in terms of data deals and pay-to-play schemes and how that's affecting independent retailers. But first, let's start off with just an introduction of yourself. So tell me a little bit about your background, Owen, and as well as Highland Cannabis and what you guys are all about.
Sure. So Owen Allerton started off in wireless. It was about almost 20 years ago. Myself and a friend started a Rogers wireless dealership. We grew that to several stores, then exited about that time, kind of 2006, 2007-ish, ended up over at BlackBerry. So I was there for the rise and fall. I was working there when we launched the Pearl and Curve. And then also as we sat back and watched Android and iPhone launch for the first time. So wild ride there. Worked in channel marketing, product marketing, always been sort of a product marketer at heart. So really appreciate, getting into the nuts and bolts of like, why does a product make someone happy, or what's the value it gives to the customer? And so ended up on the BBM team there, which got spun off. I ran marketing for BBM for a while, kind of commuting back and forth to Jakarta. Long story there with lots of adventures. But finally that got wound down. I got packaged out, got connected with a cannabis tech startup here in KW. And that's where I got my feet wet in cannabis. And full disclosure, I was not a heavy legacy consumer at all. Kind of a person who maybe smoked a joint once a summer when someone brought it to the cottage and blasted my head off, and I'd lay on the rocks and become one with the universe, sort of thing. So I don't claim to be, a legacy guy sort of thing, but I do have that background in product marketing, understanding customers and business and how products are valued to end users. So that startup I was working with was sort of running out of money, and around the same time, the Ontario government opened up licensing for the cannabis retail. And my wife and I sort of sat there and thought, well, this is decision time. It's either go back and get another corporate job and carve off more little pieces of my soul, or go get a day job or go all in on this. And let's do something different and crazy. So we went all in. We had accumulated a bunch of rental properties, which also drain your soul. So we sold those. We'd been in the rental game, slowly picking up properties and fixing them and then renting them out over that 15 sort of year period, but was really exhausted with that. So we sold all those and went all in on the cannabis retail store. So we opened Highland Cannabis. We chose to go the independent route because we're all about our local community. We love the independent shops in our community. They're inspiring, they're unique. They're what, in my opinion, some of the best parts of any community is the local shops and proprietors. So we wanted to do something like that and be part of the community. And we were trying to figure out a name, and we found this amazing location on Highland Road in Kitchener. And then I remember, trying to come up with a name that would tap into the community's roots. And a lot of German heritage here. We have the biggest Oktoberfest outside of Berlin. So I was thinking Berlin Cannabis House, but that's so overdone. Everyone does that kind of thing for their shops. And then it struck me one day when I was driving down the expressway. I was like, wait a second, we're on Highland Road. And the story just sort of wrote itself. Where, I'm a dad, so it's a dad joke. And lots of fun, and with all of the shops and all the fun cannabisy names, you can't mix us up. Our place is our name and our name is our place. So we chose to build one awesome store. We're not in it to build an empire. The ego thing was done for me. And so we built a big store, 3,000 square feet. We had the intention right from the start of having a huge team focused on service. So we have a team of 25 employees. And we're like family. We have infused Christmas dinners at our house and smoke sessions in the backyard. And our focus is really just make the customer happy. And that goes back to that product marketing insight. Because when I was trying to wrap my head around cannabis, what is the value proposition of cannabis and how do I talk about it? me, the marketer, trying to understand this new product, I had this epiphany that, cannabis is happiness. Like we're literally selling happiness here. Every customer, whether they're young or old or consuming recreationally or consuming because they've got aches and pains and can't sleep, however you slice it, cannabis is making these people happier. And that felt really good compared to pushing blackberries. So it's been a great ride. And by the end of our first year of operations, we climbed to #1 in the region, and we broke into the top 10 in the province, and we've been having fun ever since.
Yeah, well, congrats on that success, and that's great to hear. And I think something too interesting that you mentioned, before we started was, and you sort of said like you weren't necessarily like a heavy consumer prior to getting into space, but something that you guys do that I think is really interesting, and I think you described it as like the survivor approach to products, but getting your team involved as well in terms of like choosing that product selection, like choosing what the menu looks like. So you talk a little bit about that as well, because I think it's just a unique sort of approach to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I think that not being a heavy legacy consumer or involved heavily in legacies, that been a huge benefit to me, because I didn't come into it with preconceived notions about what would be hot and what wouldn't be hot and what people are going to want. I came into it knowing I know nothing. And so our approach with the big team is really to rely on the team. They're like my mini focus group of super consumers, but also just listening to the customers. But being completely open-minded, and myself being the persona or the customer segment of people coming into this not knowing anything about it, which was a lot of people were new to legalization and all the terminology. People coming in being confused and confounded by all the strain names and all the terpenes and cannabinoids and all this sort of stuff. So it was as new to me as it was to the customer. So I really helped to push the team to simplify things, dumb it down. And when it comes to product and selection, same thing, like let the bud tenders bring in stuff that they feel good about selling. So we don't mandate you have to sell this or have to sell that. I mean, of course, if we've got a little extra of something and we need to push it and move it out the door, we'll say, hey guys, let's try to sell this week. But our overarching priority is always, let's have great products. We're selling happiness here. So let's just focus on making the customer happy.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, let's dive into to data deals, and we'll be focusing on that throughout the discussion. But first, I wanted to just outline the rules around inducements, because I think it's something that there's a bit of confusion around, and I think people have varying opinions in terms of like what the rules actually are. So these vary by province, but specifically here in Ontario, what are the rules around inducements, and have they changed at all since they were first established? Because if I'm not mistaken, the AGCO came out with a few sort of new rules around it, trying to potentially provide clarity, but I think if I'm not mistaken, it sort of did the opposite. I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's really important to I think separate the discussion around what are the rules and then what's actually happening. So the rules from the very beginning were super clear. I think it's section 6.4 of the Registrar of Standards, which are the AGCO has the Registrar of Standards. The Ontario Cannabis Act, or whatever the official name of it is, says all licensed cannabis stores must abide by the Registrar standards, and they're in black and white. 6.4 says something to the effect of no inducements. Like anything that is going to induce or incentivize you, the store, to sell more of a specific licensed producer's product is not allowed. And if it's a percentage of sales, if it's a dollar amount that says, you're going to get X dollars per unit, if it's going to be, you must pay me X in order for me to take your product, anything at all related to that, not allowed, very clear. So there's no question about that, but they did make some revisions to the rules, which were supposed to clarify them. But what they did is they added exceptions to the rules. And some of those were handy. So they added an exception for product sampling, which was a contentious issue, and I think a really important one that the industry, update that and allow that. It's important because, love it or hate it, bud tenders are retail employees. These are not super high paid $25-30 an hour positions. A lot of people got excited thinking that these were, ultra high paid job. This is a retail business. They're retail employees. We pay bonuses, full benefits. We try to treat everyone really well, but we tell everybody we still watch our retail bud tenders spend way too much of their paychecks on weed every 2 weeks. Cost of living's high and inflation's going crazy. So, and they're not just buying it to smoke it, they're buying it to purposely try sample the different things so they can help sell. So at the beginning, that wasn't allowed. They revised the rules to allow that. Props to the AGCO on that one, because educational samples, like there's certain limitations in place, like it can't be more than one package per. Generally speaking, in our store, we try to even split up packages between bud tenders to give everyone between 1 and 2 grams depending on their tolerance. They need to be able to get a sense of the product, and if you've got a high tolerance, you might need a little more than a gram to get that, whatever. So anyways, education sampling allowed. Cool. Anything of like nominal value, not an issue. Like if it's tiny, swag, you want to give t-shirts to the staff sort of thing, that's fully allowed, is the way that was also framed. The one that they revised that was problematic, and I still scratch my head, I'd love to know who asked for this at all, was a revision to allow retailers to sell data to licensed producers for business analytics and intelligence purposes. And so what we heard rumors of happening in the background is some of these big transactions were happening anyways before that revision. And, there was some of the listing fee sort of things going on. And the counter argument that the retailers and producers were giving is that, oh, it's not listing fees, it's data. Who are you to say? So they must have presented and lobbied for this argument that, we're selling data, not paying for listing fees or inducements or rebates or whatever it might be. And apparently we're successful at getting the AGCO to change the rules or to allow that exception in there. But the important thing, back to this initial question you said, is that inducements still aren't allowed. And that is the bigger philosophical debate that people sometimes engage in, because other industries like grocery and pharmacy, you're allowed to, as far as I know, there's no rules that say you can't pay a listing fee. If you want to have prominent placement in Loblaws, everyone under the sun knows you have to pay for it, and they do, and that's okay. But the point is, in this industry, it's not allowed. There is a debate, which I guess the industry and the government and lobbyists could have, about should they be allowed or not. If we want to have that debate, great. It seems like they're pretty bad for consumer choice, because what we've seen happen, and it's proven in grocery and proven in markets where this is run rampant, is that it eliminates and pushes the small craft producers out of the business, and it also punishes the independent retailers. So you cut down consumer choice on where to buy, and you cut down consumer choice on what you can buy. I have to assume that's why we had those rules in the first place. But whether or not we want to debate that they should be allowed, because they are allowed elsewhere, the fact of the matter is they are not allowed. They haven't been allowed from the start. Even with those updates to the rules, they are not allowed. Inducements, the exception allowing them to sell data did not say it can be you can now have inducements as long as you call them data. So calling it data when it's actually an inducement is actually just misrepresentation with the intent to circumvent the regulations. It's not a loophole at all. I was erroneously calling it a loophole, but it's not. It's misrepresentation, purposefully, engineering your whatever you're doing to hide what you're doing to get away with it. And we've been pitched on some of these things directly by different producers, and they'll be so blatant as to say, we'll have a call once a month. You can send us a spreadsheet with your sales numbers for our products. We'll punch in the dollar amount here. We have this nice spreadsheet that spits out the totals that you then get as a kickback, and then you can invoice us for that. And on the invoice, just put data. And if anyone asks, just say, yeah, I sent them some data. Why is it different from month to month? Well, I sent them different amounts of data. Like, how insane is that? Like, data is never valued based on the numbers in the spreadsheet that you're sending. And never mind that a spreadsheet with, call it 50 SKUs and their sales figures could be worth thousands of dollars. Anyways, I went on a giant rant there about
No,
how the
I
whole
think
thing, but
it's important. So like it sounds like on your end, like it's pretty clear cut. And I tend to agree with you. I think this sort of idea that the regulations aren't clear enough and like there's not enough again clarity on what inducements actually are. Like I tend to agree, like the registrar standards are pretty clear here. I think it is interesting too. You mentioned sort of who was the driving force behind getting that data deal put into those registrar standards as the addition, because I'm with you. Like I think I heard about data deals prior to that actual change in the rules, right? So definitely seems like something that was lobbied for at the end of the day. So and I think you do a great job in terms of when I've heard you speak on this issue. It's just like let's not beat around the bush here. Like let's put it plainly. Like these are kickbacks that retailers are getting like from producers and brands in exchange for their sales data. I put those in quotes, right? But in reality, like they're not really paying for data at the end of the day. This is preferential treatment for their products in the form of potentially budtender recommendations, brand displays, and advertisements, but maybe even beyond that, right? Like specific, how much of this SKU or this particular brand are you selling, and how are we seeing that in your monthly report, essentially? So would you say that's like an accurate description? Is there anything I'm missing there? Is there anything you would add to that?
yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it on the head. It's problematic in a number of ways because, and I've said this before too, is people assume that large chains are cheaper. We've all just been sort of trained, Best Buy, Walmart, whatever, they're all cheaper. Well, why are they cheaper? They're cheaper because of bulk buying, right? Their buyers say, we've got a bajillion stores. If you want in our stores, they squeeze the supplier, they get better deals, right? So this entire industry was set up to not allow that. We all have to buy through the OCS. The OCS to some points drive me crazy because they're like a kindergarten teacher, fair police. Everything's got to be super fair and equitable all the time, which, the government agency. So of course they have to be, right? But so we go to these great lengths to have that level playing field. And if you think about it, an independent retailer should be able to sell cheaper. We tend to not have expensive build outs, tend to have smaller stores, tend to not have the tier 1 locations with expensive rent. We don't have head offices. We don't have executive salaries to pay. You often have the independent proprietors working in the shop. So the independent retailers should be the cheap ones. But this data deal circumvention that's been opened up is basically a way for chains to get around that level playing field, because they knew that they could only, if you're a big chain and you're structured and you're trying to scale and have tens or hundreds of stores or whatever it is, you can't have the same great service that a small independent can, because one of my secret weapons is that it's me here every day and I can always make a call, and I have a rule book of here's our store policies and whatnot, but I can bend a rule, not a firm compliance rule, but in terms of, do I take a return? Or what am I going to do with this scenario? Will I accept how do I deal with this customer problem? I can always apply myself to solve that problem outside the textbook. Whereas a big chain, as great as their employees might be, they're bound by the general policies of the big chain. They can't be as agile and responsive and provide the same great service. So how can the chains compete? Their only answer was, well, we're going to have the lowest price. And so they needed to find a way around that rule that was in place. And the thing that gets me, and why there's so much harm, and why we launched Cancel Kickbacks and why it's had so much support. Cancel Kickbacks is not about me. It's not about Highland Cannabis at all. It's only gotten so much traction, and we're only raising so much awareness, and people are kind of calling to arms around this, because it's everybody. It's the wrongness of what's happening when the promise out of the gate here was going to be that we had this level playing field. And as a result, hundreds of independents signed up. They might not even have signed up. People may not have remortgaged their houses and went all in and opened shops if they knew that chains were going to be able to come in and bulldoze them with better pricing. So we and it's the government. So reasonably, we assumed that we could trust that the government would actually enforce the regulations. we assumed there wouldn't be backdoor whatever. I don't know if it's dealings or lobbying or what you call it, how we get to this state where I feel like I'm operating in a corrupt third world country, not in Canada, where they're able to blatantly abuse the rules to the detriment of hundreds of independent stores. So cancel kickbacks, again, it isn't about me. This isn't about one store launching this campaign, and it wouldn't be doing that well if it was. It's doing what it's doing, and we're raising awareness, and people are getting up in arms because this is we sort of a lightning rod issue where everyone was being violated by this abuse. And we all saw it, and no one thought we could do anything about it. But it's because we're so fragmented. It's because there's hundreds of independents, and it just seemed like, oh, this is the way the world works. Well, these guys, from what we can see, they were just going to keep pushing the limit and get away with more and more and more and more until they hit a wall. And I sort of had this moment of hopelessness 6 to 8 months ago where I thought, oh man, this is just the way this works, that we make a bad decision getting into this space. But then I realized this is a new industry. We shouldn't let it become like this. We're all stakeholders in this industry, and there's a hell of a lot more of us. It's not like we're a tiny minority. There's a hell of a lot more of us independent shops than the big guys. We need to put our foot down and insist that this is not what we let our industry become. I've heard recently from different producers and participants of the industry from Alberta, and they've told me, they know what our cause is, and we filled them in on cancel kickbacks. They have told me that Alberta is a microcosm of the future of Ontario. So what's going on in Alberta, if you fast forward 2 years and things kept going the way they were, that's what you're going to have here. And what you ended up with there is a couple of big value chains annihilating all the independents. But then it's also created this virtuous cycle where, because those chains now control the market, they only push the products from the LPs that pay them. And since those are now the products that are selling in the market, the AGLC, I think I've got it right, basically the Alberta equivalent to the OCS, thinks those are the only products that are popular, and they are starting to delist the small craft high quality growers. So it's actually becoming hard for quality weed to get into Alberta because the AGLC, I guess I don't know if they're complicit or they're ignorant, but they're believing the numbers they're seeing, and they think that all this stuff that's selling in these chain stores, because it's being paid for, is the best selling weed, and they're getting rid of the good stuff. And so what I've actually heard from people on the ground in Alberta is that it's now becoming hard to get good weed in Alberta, which is exactly what we're talking about. Consumer choice just falling out the window when these rules are abused like this.
It's really, I mean, so many interesting points there. Like, I think, like you said, like the whole system, you can debate the public, private, government-run model all you want, but like we do have a hybrid system in Ontario. Alberta has a hybrid system as well. And like sort of the benefit of the government model in some ways, you could say, is that level playing field, right? And so the fact that like, and I think it's such a good point too, what you mentioned, like bulk pricing, like that isn't the reason why they're able to sell at a discounted rate. And I think what's also interesting too is like, I think originally when we started to see those value chains pop up, a lot of people thought like, okay, this isn't sustainable. What they're going to do is, lower the price, take a loss, and then eventually jack up the price. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've really seen that. And probably part of the reason, and I know you've mentioned in the past, like you were sort of doing your own research, like how are these companies surviving, right? Like based on these margins. And, it all sort of comes back to the data deals. Like that's why they're surviving. And, who knows how sustainable that is in the long term, but that might be part of the reason why we haven't seen necessarily like that price jump back up. And the sort of value chain sort of, changing directions and turning on the consumer. To the Alberta point too, it's like, I think Alberta's always been almost a little bit ahead in terms of like cannabis retail. They were sort of the first ones to pop up. So I think Ontario has always looked at them as sort of the canary in the coal mine in that sense. And it's like, and I see that too, when you just mentioned like the self-fulfilling prophecy. And like I think like Ontario is a bit of a victim to that as well. Like retailers get that sort of sheet of like the top selling SKUs, and I think what retailers see is like the number 1, 2, 3 like are consistently being reordered. And there could be a good reason for that. Like I think there are probably products that are at the top of the list for a reason. People want maybe a cheaper, higher THC product, and that just is what it is. But I think we're sort of victim to that as well, where those products are just consistently at the top and therefore like consistently reordered by every store, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It goes in circles for sure.
Yeah. All right, so to dig a little bit deeper now, just in terms of like how these data deals function, and I know you've been against them for a long time and not something that you've bought into, but just in terms of what you've seen in the space, like what are some of these agreements that you're seeing between retailers and producers? Like, are we seeing different types of agreements? Are there sort of unique, creative ways that they're getting around this? And, do you have any examples? And are there some, I guess, that are like more egregious than others in your opinion?
Yeah, well, I mean, to the point you touched on just in your last comments there about, how are they doing this? Again, absolutely. Like if you go back a year and a half ago, we thought there was players that were just going to take a loss and, that, wow, they've got deep pockets. I guess we're screwed. We're going to have to last as long as they are. But then as you start to look closer at some of them and how they're doing it, some of them are publicly traded, and you can start to see those dollars on their income statement. They have to declare them. They're not retail sales, right? So you can start to drill into it and see it there. And this is the thing that set us off as we started to investigate and realize this wasn't someone with deep pockets trying to implement that strategy, which would be frankly a shitty strategy for like, it's kind of a dick move, but okay, if you got the money, you can do it. But no, what they've actually done is built a business model around it. Right? Like they've built a model that physically makes this sustainable on an ongoing basis. And what I mean by that is when you actually do a little bit of math and plug in a few assumptions, it looks like some of these chains are getting between, call it 7 and 10% additional points of margin. Now, a very important point about all of this is the OCS.ca pricing sort of sets the benchmark for the industry. And that markup is only around 30%. So a lot of people think, oh, my retailers are being greedy or whatever. But if you are in a retailer and you see something that's 30% off, they're selling it at cost. And it's important people know this because, there's only so much you can do. And, on one hand, people like to complain about living wages and inflation and it's so tough and whatever. And then on the other hand, no one wants to pay anything for anything. So it's like, how do you want people to make a living, right? So you need to pay your bills, pay your staff, and run a semi-viable business. You need to be making at least 20% markup in general, right? The OCS markups around 30, just call it a little over that. And then you see these guys offering these crazy prices that are, call it 25% lower than the OCS.ca pricing, or which tends to be the average pricing most stores will go with to try to make a go at it, right? And it was, okay, how is that possible? Well, all right, they're left with 5 or 10 points, but then you add back that 7, 8, 9, 10% extra that they're getting from data. And all of a sudden you do have something closer to the 20% mark, which becomes viable. So to your question, how are they actually structuring these? I'm only going to talk about what I've heard, and I'm not going to name names. I say this throughout cancel kickbacks, and it's on a disclaimer on our website. I am only talking about people who do this. I am not making any claims about who does it. So we've heard things like fixed fee data subscriptions, like a really enormous ones, like you have to pay us this giant amount per year. And then what I've heard from different LPs is they'll sit down with these retail chains and, they'll have a meeting to pitch their new product lineup. Here's a whole selection of things that we have coming down the line. They're going to be in this product drop. Do you want to take them in your stores? And then the LP goes, well, are you subscribed to our data program? And the the chain says that. And then the producer of the LP goes, what do you mean? Are we subscribed? And the chain says, well, you should maybe think about subscribing to our data program. And they're like, no, we don't need any data. We're good. And then crickets, they never take their products. Whereas if they say, oh, well, I'll take the data program, then, oh, well, we'll look at your products then. So there's that sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, old boys club sort of thing going on where you sign up for our data program, and we're never going to say it, we're never going to put it in writing, but all of a sudden now you will be considered, and you might just magically end up with great placement. So a lot of stuff is being done verbally, whereas then the contract says it's just for data, and you've got that big fixed fee one. Now you have others that are being way more explicit about it. So elaborate spreadsheets with calculators that are you plug in unit sales or dollar value of units moved, and it will literally calculate the dollar kickback they're going to pay you. And then what they'll do is say, okay, we'll have a phone call once a month. You can send us the spreadsheet with the data, which is just their SKUs and how many units sold. And then we'll plug it in, and it will calculate the dollar amount. We'll tell you the dollar amount, and then you'll send us an invoice for the dollar amount. And it'll be a percentage of the cost of goods sold of the units of what you moved of their product. And but on the invoice, you're just going to put data. And if anyone asks you what that data is, you're just going to say, it's the spreadsheet of stuff that I sent them. And why is it different? Oh, because I had different amounts of work. There was different amounts of information in it. That's just what it is. But basically, again, I've been told directly, just disguise it as data, just put the data label on it. Also being told things and heard about scenarios where retailers will say, we want X dollars per SKU, per store, per month. So kind of like a variation on that fixed fee. So if they're not quite as big and they don't have the same weight, it's like, well, if you want the listing in our store, it's going to be, you're going to pay us per store, per SKU, per month to have it. But what I've heard from the LPs is many of them got really pissed off with that, because stores were putting, a chain of whatever number of stores would order a couple cases. They'd transfer one unit to each store, and they'd hide it in the back, and they'd get the dollar per month from the LP without selling anything. So yeah, they were there, they were present, they had the SKU in the store, but they weren't getting the sales. So the LPs have told me that they moved away from those deals to these percentage of sales deals because they were getting scammed by chains. And so it's sort of going on all, in all directions. And the one thing I've gathered is that it feels like probably 90% of the industry is engaged in this stuff in one way, shape, or form or the other. There's even more benign use cases. And it might sound funny hearing me say that, but I'll walk through the one that I've heard that does make sense. And it's around price drops. And so what's happening right now is a lot of producers are being punished by the OCS if their products don't move quickly. Mm-hmm. So if you're a producer and you've got a bunch of products sitting at the OCS and it's not selling, you kind of go on notice. And I don't know all the terminology and the exact timeframes, but basically you go on notice, and it's like, you're in trouble. The stuff doesn't start moving, you're in trouble. And the worst case scenario is they'll do something called an RTV, a return to vendor, and they'll ship all the product back to the vendor, back to the producer, and too bad for you. You got to eat the cost. You're going to basically have to destroy the product. So the producers get really panicky at this stage, and they need to do something about it. And the problem is us stores aren't ordering it because we probably still have it in stock and it hasn't sold yet. So even if the producer does a price drop through official channels at the OCS, the stores get screwed. And this is something that's not talked about a lot in the industry. Price drops at the OCS don't immediately translate through to retailers. We don't get a credit. If I want the price drop, I have to order more of the new product and basically just lower the price on my existing product. So if it drops 5%, not a big deal. I can absorb that. But if something drops 50%, anything I had in stock, I'm now selling at a loss, which is part of the game. We have to do it. But as a result, there's no way to retroactively do a price drop into the distribution channel. So one thing I've seen a lot is even some of the good producers that I like and have good relationships with, they are doing these offers and rebates through these buying groups. And I've seen, some of these buying groups, I won't name names, but I've seen their offers they send out, and they're very different from the listing fee sort of scenario. What they are is, you can tell it's product that I know hasn't been moving well because it's not moving well in my store. It's all the stuff that's not selling in my store. They're offering rebates on it because they're trying to get me to lower my price and incentivize me to sell it. But really, it's just like a price drop. So there's this weird line there where, is it an inducement, or like, hey, what's a price drop at the OCS? Isn't that just an inducement too? Well, to me, the biggest differentiator between the two is that when it goes through the OCS, we all have access to it, right? So I've actually pitched the OCS and reached out to David Lobo and had some back and forth with him on the OCS launching a rebate program.
Mhm.
Like, they should facilitate this because it's really just a price drop. And LPs need to do that. If you're trying to avoid an RTV and having everyone in the industry that cares and has a heart cries every time we have to grind up flour and mix it with kitty litter. So none of us want to do those destructions in the sense of it's just a waste, right? And someone once told me there's no such thing as bad weed. There's just overpriced weed. It was a master grower from Mood Ring. Ironically, they went out of business. But if they would allow a mechanism, or kind of, if the OCS were to facilitate a rebate program, they could do those retroactive price drops on the inventory that's in channel in retailers, vaults and on their shelves. That would eliminate a huge use case that's happening out there today. So you do see a lot of that. A lot of those offers through buying groups are just those sort of rebates of LPs trying to push them through. And which also brings up a great point, about buying groups in general. I don't fault those guys. They say they're on a mission to try to help independents compete with the chains. The only thing that's sort of an evil about what's happening there is many independents seem to think that will give them a fighting chance against the chains, but they're not seeing the forest for the trees, because the biggest payouts are in the hundreds. The average payouts in the hundreds. I've heard that some of those buying groups, their average monthly payout was about $250. That's not going to help you compete with a value chain that is able to get 8 or 9 points of margin across their entire portfolio of sales. Mm-hmm. So the flaw or the risk of these buying groups is that they trick people into thinking that this loophole is good, and that, okay, the big guys are doing it, I'm going to do it too, and that'll help me survive. I got news for you. It's not going to help you survive. And really and a point to emphasize too is, with cancel kickbacks, our focus is really the predatory pricing aspect of it. Like I mentioned, I think a lot of the industry is participating in these. I'd say, there's the value chains doing it. Then there's the other 80% of the industry that's doing it to try to compete with the value chains, not realizing they won't be able to keep up. But the problem that we are focused on, that we are lobbying the government to do something about, is the predatory pricing that's become a sustainable model thanks to this kickback schemes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess this kind of speaks to it, but is that when we're really like focused on the impact on independent retailers, and like that does seem to be where like the major issue is lying, and they're the most susceptible really to being negatively impacted by these kickback schemes. So is that sort of what you're speaking to there, is like why it really doesn't make sense for smaller independents with maybe 1 or 2 stores? Like, because some people might make the argument of like, maybe joining some of these buying groups, or like, why don't you just go off and try to, establish these agreements with licensed producers yourself and like stop complaining about it? But really is the issue there. It's like it's never, the kickback is never going to be that substantial at the end of the day. And there's no sort of like, licensed producers aren't really that incentivized to work with smaller independents because of that.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, the independents, we're a scrappy bunch. It's life or death for us, right? This is all in. This is what, if you remortgaged your house and built a pot shop, like it's not going to go well if you give up. And my heart goes out to everyone who's had to give up because they couldn't keep up with pricing. And really the impact on the independent is that, you've got a value chain pops up and they're 25% lower, and you got no move. It's like checkmate. So what they tend to start doing is price matching. And you price match, and now I'm only making 5 points margin, and there's no living to be had selling product at cost, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what happens. Now they're a scrappy bunch, and it's life or death, so they're going to fight to the end, which is why I think you get them participating in buying groups and trying to do everything they can, and they're going to do everything they can, because that's you have to. Otherwise, you're sunk and you give up and you go back, and I don't know what you do. You get a day job and you're stuck paying off the $500,000 you borrowed to open a pot shop for the next 5 to 10 years, right? So I don't blame them for trying to do anything they can, but what I implore them all is to realize that even if they're participating in these things, they need to get behind cancel kickbacks. Sign the petition at cancelkickbacks.com. We're looking for as many retailers as possible to sign that, because our focus is to demand action against the ones using kickbacks to fund predatory pricing. And that's the thing. And that's, everyone talks about the oversaturation of stores. No one was talking about how it's actually these value chains lowering the bar for everybody, just eating the margin, destroying any margin that was in the industry. And it's not about not wanting to give consumers a low price. There are, we just want to be able to give them the same low price. I'd love to be able to give those deals. If someone's got, some producer's got money that they want to throw behind a product, just lower your price. Or, I wish the OCS would have a rebate program so they could put a rebate out and be available to everybody. I mean, Lord knows we all have to submit our sales data every month. So the OCS and the AGCO get a report from every single licensed store in the province detailing what they have sold by SKU by day. Like, they know what I've sold, so they could easily calculate rebates and just be someone doing some math. It wouldn't be a new system or process or anything like that, right? But if they made it available to everybody, we could all give the same deals. And there are cheap products. So it's not like consumer choice and consumer pricing would be limited by getting rid of these, because there's lots of products. Like, we sell 3.5 grams as cheap as $16. Mm-hmm. I've got quarters as cheap as $24, like milled quarters. Like, obviously you're not getting premium product at that pricing, right? So it's not like there aren't good prices to be had. It's the unfairness of these chains getting this advantage because they're willing to break the rules. Meanwhile, everybody who follows the rules gets punished. And I've said that before too. It's like, let's stop playing around here. Like, this is ridiculous. Yeah. Like, I say either enforce the rules or change them, because you have a regime set up now that punishes good people and rewards people who are willing to skirt the rules through, convoluted financial engineering. And you asked that before about how they're doing it. And another thing they're doing is these chains are setting themselves up to take advantage of this. And what they're doing is setting up corporate structures where this corporate entity owns the license and operates the store. And for everyone listening at home, the AGCO's authority only applies to license holders, right? It starts and ends there. People go at the AGCO about the illicit shops. That's the OPP. The AGCO regulates licenses. That's it. So here's the license holders over here. Now, these big corporate chains set up other corporate entities like head office or parent companies or whatever, other real estate holding companies, and they insist that the data payment gets paid over here. So this company, legitimately operates on a loss, and they cash in all the money over here. It's called financial engineering. Mm-hmm. You guys, if you enter this game planning to do this, and you have teams of lawyers and you set up convoluted corporate structures to do things like this, you have an inherent advantage. If you're a honest, hardworking little independent that just goes into this with blinders on, thinking, oh yeah, there's going to be rules, we're going to follow them, I'm going to set up a company, I'm going to open a shop. You didn't prepare yourself for any of this. So any independent taking these deals is at 10 times more risk because they didn't apply the same financial engineering to create an insulated corporate structure that could protect them from it. I'm worried that if the AGCO does, go on a enforcement rampage with this, the ones that it might get screwed are the little guys. So, please still sign cancel kickbacks. But again, our focus is on the big ones and the ones breaking those rules. But it's really convoluted because all of these schemes advantage the big guys.
It has like an offshore banking kind of feel to it, eh?
It doesn't even need to be. It's just a different company.
Yeah. So I want to dive in because I think, you mentioned it, and we'll put a link down to the cancel kickbacks campaign and highly encourage retailers to get involved. And like you said, like independents are the bigger voice here. And I think, in general, the cannabis industry sort of, has some growing pains when it comes to sort of a united voice. So I think, movements like this are really important. But to go back to the licensed producer side, because I've seen you mention, before that, like, they're complicit, and licensed producers, if they just sort of stop this right now, they could sort of end this whole scheme that's happening right now. And at the end of the day, like, I've heard people talk about too, like, is this really sustainable for licensed producers? Like, is this something that they can actually keep going for the next, 5-10 years? Because it really doesn't seem like it. If they're just taking a huge loss, all their products are being sold, at cost, like, is this really that beneficial for them? in the long term. So I'm curious your thoughts about that. Like, is this something where, you know, I'm sure we need both retailers and producers to work together, but do you think on that LP side, like if they really came together and were like, let's just stop these data deals altogether, it's not good for us, it's not good for the independent retailers, could that have a huge impact as well?
I'm afraid it's one of those, I'm not sure if it's the right term, but like the prisoner's dilemma sort of economic game that they talk about, where it's like, it's always going to be, if everyone does it, it'll be advantage to someone to break the rules sort of thing. I don't know if you'll ever see the LPs all come together for their own, you know, mutual benefit. They're all going to be so cutthroat, especially the publicly traded ones. They need to show quarter on quarter results. And, you know, coming from a corporate background at like BlackBerry and whatnot, I understand the mentality at a corporate, especially publicly traded company, is you pour money in and get results out. The expectation is we're going to spend this much on marketing, and I want to see that marketing drive this much sales, right? So there's always that mentality of pour money in, get results out. And there's so little you can do in marketing in cannabis that really that turns into, well, where can we spend this money to get results? And these pubcos engage with the big chains. And again, to your point earlier about, you know, will the independents and these buying groups ever have the same traction as the big guys? You deal with the head office of a chain and you make a deal, it gets implemented. You will have consistent point of sale, banners, positioning. Like you can basically trust that when you make that deal, it's going to get pushed out and executed in all the straight chains. You do a deal with a buying group, you have no idea what's going to happen. You know, all you can trust for sure is that that offer gets pushed out to everybody. Are they going to bring your product in, give it front and center positioning, whatever it is, right? So the big pubcos, I don't think are ever going to come together, sing kumbaya and cancel data deals. The appeal I do make to them, because I've talked to them and they're honest that like, yeah, we do them. We know you're against it. And I'm like, oh, at least you're honest. I'm like, so, and I tell them like, and I've told them is if you keep, they pitch me, bring in this product. And I say, why? It's going to be cheaper down the street at the value chain. You know, I'm not going to sell any of it because you're helping them sell it 20% cheaper than me. So why should I bring it in and sell it at no margin? So I purposely try to, as a retailer, bring in products from LPs I know are not paying for it. Like, why would I help someone, an LP, who's funding my competitor? So I think there's a big role to play of all the independents starting to put pressure on the LPs so that they start to wake up and do a little bit of that calculus. And that's been my appeal to the LPs is like, listen, okay, maybe this is a fact of life. Maybe you're always going to do it and I can't change this behavior. I hope that there's some enforcement and it stops. I think that's the government's role. They're the ones that made the rules. They should enforce them. But Mr. LP, if you're going to do it, please make the smart decision not to do it with the guys who are using your money to fund predatory pricing.
Yeah.
Because the fact is, of the 1,500 stores, I'd say over 1,200 aren't doing that. There's only like 200 or 300 chains that are doing this value play of trying to undermine everybody and subsidize it with this. There are many more stores taking the payments, but they're just putting it in their pocket. And I don't think that's right, but they're not hurting anybody. If they want to break the rules and take that risk, that's on them. But if it's the guys taking the money and then using it to try to, you know, put everyone else out of business. So I make the appeal to the LPs, just don't play with the guys who are using the money to kill the industry. Because if you play this out, you're going to be left with Alberta. And there's going to be only a couple of these chains left. They're going to control the market. And they're going to extort you even more. You know, you're doing it because of this nearsighted drive to spend your money every quarter and show results every quarter. Guess what? It's going to become just a normal cost of doing business. And they're going to play you against the next LP about who will pay them the highest for that premium placement on the shelf. And it'll be a never ending cycle. The LPs should realize that the independents are their biggest ally here. They're going to do better with 1,200 independents than they are with 300 chains. And so while the key account managers, PS, I've also learned that's code for the people who are in charge of data deals. So if an LP has a key account manager, they're the guy who does the data deals. And that's how you know they're doing a data deal. So, you know, if these people, if they keep doing it with them, they'd be far better off supporting the 1,200 stores. And if they just engage them properly, I've challenged the LPs in the last LinkedIn post that said, hey, I dare you guys to take a position. You know, it's one thing in marketing, you know, pick a segment. Sometimes you choose who you don't want to serve, And everyone's so afraid of getting the boot from these value chains, but I'm like, they're a minority. Like, someone should be ballsy enough to come right out there and say, we don't pay to play. We're not funding predatory pricing. It's a great, as a marketer, I think it's a great positioning. And all you got to do is be willing to sacrifice a couple of these assholes to, sorry, to embrace the other 80% of the industry that's good.
Yeah, no, 100%. And like, I think and what you're speaking to earlier as well, I think like the consumer gets hit at the end of the day too, right? Like if we just have the LPs that are doing these data deals that, at the end of the day, like in my opinion, like tends to probably be like the subpar product that they're trying to sell. And like, as a bit of a cannabis snob myself, like, if it's the independents that are sort of selling the best product, like those are the type of stores that I would want to frequent, right? And there's always that 80-20 rule when it comes to cannabis consumers. And in my opinion, like I still think that's sort of the segment of the market that we really haven't attracted to the legal stores. Like it's getting better and better, but like if we really want to bring in the vast majority of cannabis users and the ones that are at the end of the day spending the most money at cannabis stores, like it's going to be the high quality products that are going to attract them. And like if this is what's happening and we only have the value chains, like it's only going to get worse in that sense, right? So I think like it's so critical from that consumer perspective as well. Like if you want good weed, then like these are the type of initiatives that you need to support at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I guess speaking to that, like if licensed producers, aren't necessarily going to be the ones to really do anything about this issue, although I totally agree with your point. Like I think that's a really good marketing approach from an LP to be like, hey, we don't deal with this. But like you mentioned it, like the government and the AGCO. So like, where are we at in terms of like them actually addressing this issue? So, last time I checked, there really hasn't been much. I think they said that they were going to be looking into it, but from your perspective, like has any enforcement action been taken? And, to that point as well, like we recently saw the OCS reduce its margin. So like, do you see that having impact on some of these predatory pricing tactics? I've seen you suggest in the past, like implementing a minimum average monthly margin. So, what I really like about your approach is actually you come up with, and the rebate thing that you mentioned earlier, like you actually have some potential solutions to this. So, speak to that, like AGCO, are they doing anything? OCS margin change, how big of an impact do you think that's going to have on this issue, if any? And yeah, again, like that minimum average monthly margin, like talk to us a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, sure. So the OCS margin change, I think, unfortunately, is just going to do nothing. It's just products will get cheaper. Everyone will adjust their prices accordingly. The biggest benefit that has is for consumers, because I think everyone will ultimately lower their prices a tiny bit. But from what I've heard, that reduction is going to be relatively small. Like I give the government credit because at a macro level, they gave up a bunch of money that they didn't have to. Like they put $60 million back into consumers' pockets or into the industry, which I believe will ultimately go to the consumers' pockets. But on a micro level, I think you're talking about like $1 reduction on a $30 half quarter. So it's a small margin reduction by the OCS that is, I think, just going to affect the cost of all the products across the board. And the value chains will be cheaper, the independents will be cheaper. We'll all just come down by like $1, and then that's it. So it's not going to be anything mind-blowing. A lot of people are really excited. Oh my God, prices are coming down. It's not like they cut it in half at all. And it's one of those macro things where, again, you take that reduction times all the weed sold in the entire province over a year. The government walked away from some of it, and I think they tried to do that as a signal to combat recognizing they made record profits and that they can give up a little bit, and to combat the illicit market, just even if it's only a little bit each, it is putting money back into the pockets of consumers. So there's that. What was the other part of the question? Sorry.
AGCO, do you think they're gonna? Actually, let's go first to sort of like the minimum average monthly margin, because I heard you say like that sort of would have a bigger impact than this.
Yeah, the notion there, people talk about price floors, like minimums that you could sell things for, and I initially like puked all over that idea. Like, I don't want people telling me what I have to sell stuff for. If I want to have a sale on something, I need to be able to have a sale on something. Cannabis consumers, especially the connoisseurs, want fresh product. Sometimes you order a bunch of something in and it doesn't sell very fast, and before you know it, 6 months have passed and it's old, and I need to be able to put it on sale. And I might want to even sell it at a loss. I mean, it's happened. I've sold stuff 40% off because it's just old and it wasn't moving. What else am I going to do? Someone will enjoy it at the right price, right? And I don't want to have to fill out forms or get permission or explain myself every time I have to have a sale. Never mind staff discounts. Our staff discount for employees to try new products is 25%. That would violate, I'd look like I was a value chain selling it at that, right? So no one wants to create a bureaucratic nightmare of, a communist era price dictating regime, right? So that, no, definitely hard no. But if you look at it at a macro level, and again, we talked about these things, and to the AGCO point, I don't believe there's been any enforcement on this. One thing I've heard is that it's very hard to prove because of all that financial engineering and convoluted schemes. And, no, it's just data. Prove it's not data. Is that a reasonable price? Well, it's reasonable because I paid it. All these circular arguments, and they got teams of lawyers arguing it. So if it's hard to prove or enforce inducements being disguised as data, then the question comes out, well, can we just protect the industry from the harm that comes from it? So is there a way to have some kind of price floor approach that stops someone who's clearly operating a business model that is designed to bankrupt the industry? And as much as I hate the notion of price floors or price controls, you created this industry. It is heavily regulated. We are forced to buy through the OCS, that's supposed to have fair and equal pricing for everybody. So it's far from a free market, right? So free market arguments don't really apply because it's already so convoluted. And so should we have a system in place that makes sure no one's operating businesses designed to bankrupt other people? Like, I'm all for competition. Like I set up my shop, you do your shop, may the best man win. But someone has an unfair advantage and is trying to put everyone else out of business. I think that's a little different than competition in a sense, right? So the notion of like a price floor, and this came up from discussions with a few different people, a price floor done by minimum average monthly margins. If there was going to be one, I could wrap my head around that approach. And it would be very easy to do because, like I said earlier, we all submit all of our sales to the government anyway. So they can see my margins. They can see my sales. This is the big data leak a year ago. The OCS info got leaked. It showed every store's sales. You could see how much money we're making. It was all right there in black and white. So as easily as that data was leaked, they could generate a list of stores and say, here's your overall margin for the month. I mean, Lord knows any smart business is already watching that number like a hawk, right? Like, we sold X amount, this was our cost of goods sold, and this was the margin we made on the product. And it works out to whatever percentage. This is just basics of operating a business. You could theoretically pick a minimum for that and have that be the floor. So the nice thing about that would be that it is a blended average on your whole month of sales. So my 40% discounts disappear amongst my sales of my prices at normal products. And it's just the average margin for the whole month. So no reports, no bureaucratic overhead, nothing like that. It could just be my average margin for the month. And, something like 20%, I think most of the industry would not have an issue with. I don't pretend to know exactly that number, but I feel like it's between 20 and 25% if we were to do something like that. And that would, if you're operating your business at a 5 or 10% margin, something's up. Like, it just has to be. You're not paying the rent. And if you're just losing money to bankrupt everybody, that's shitty too. Like, that shouldn't be in the government's interests. That's not why they did this. They didn't legalize and go open license so that we could open 1,500 stores and then someone could make, unfairly make half of them go out of business. So, I'm all for rebates and all that kind of stuff. And if the OCS were to do it, and all for having deals for consumers, but that kind of approach might be a feasible way of doing it. I haven't heard anything back from the AGCO about that. I pitched it to the OCS and they said, yeah, the AGCO has the tools. They set minimum pricing on alcohol in grocery stores. So part of that deal was that the grocery stores can't undercut the LCBO. They have those controls in place. It's in the laws. If they decided to do this, it would be a great solution. And frankly, I think it would address all the concerns of the cancel kickbacks campaign. We may not have canceled the kickbacks, but we would have stopped the harm, which is really the driver behind the campaign. Where our focus of cancel kickbacks is not on everybody, every last little person participating in a buying group who's taking a kickback. The focus of that campaign is to stop the predatory pricing. It's these guys who've made it part of their business model, right? So in my mind, I think all of us cancel kickbacks folk would, pack up our bags and go home and carry on about our business if they were to do something like that. I haven't seen any indication that would be the case.
Yeah. It's like, again, such an important point, and just like wrapping up here, I don't know if you expected to, when you first got into the business to become like, in my opinion, one of the most like important advocates like in the cannabis retail space right now. So just, kudos to you for taking on this movement, to spearheading this. So, before we wrap up here, can you just tell us, how do people get involved to the Cancel Kickbacks campaign? What can they do to, also to, express their support and that sort of thing?
Absolutely. Well, cancelkickbacks.com is basically just a petition. So if you are supportive of this and want to show your support, the best thing you can do is sign it, and more importantly, get stores to sign it. Our focus has been to get as many of the licensed retailers as possible to sign this petition, because I don't expect to get 50,000 end user signatures. It's a complicated issue that is very specific to the industry. But if the industry participants, the stores themselves and licensed producers are willing to sign that, our plan is to take that and present it to the AGCO and basically just demand action and show them that a large number of stores, we're already over 140 stores have signed it, which is bigger than the biggest chain operating in Ontario, are rejecting this, and we want to see the rules enforced. And we're not even asking for change. We're just begging that somebody please enforce the existing rules so that we have a fighting chance. So the best thing that anyone can do is spread the word. I'm happy to, even if you tell a retailer about it and they want more information, I try to make time every day to talk to anyone who wants to talk to me about this. So I'm happy to spread the word to them. And again, the focus is the predatory pricing. I think there's been some reluctance from smaller independent retailers who may be part of buying groups who don't want to sign on or show support for this sort of thing. But I tell them, guys, look at the big picture. You're never going to get as much as the big guys are getting. And I'm sure you would rather not have to deal with one of these value chains next door than get a paycheck for a couple $100 every month from your buying group. So I encourage all of them to sign that one way or another, because again, that's the focus of the whole thing. So, and you're right, I did not imagine or set out to do any of this. So, yeah, this isn't about me or Highland. Your point about never imagined doing any of this. I never imagined, never set out to. At some point, someone in the industry even got mad at me, said, you're gunning for a seat on the RICO board. I'm like, no, I'm not. I was on student council in high school, and the one thing that it taught me is that I never want to be involved in any type of politics again. So I have no desire to do this. I can't wait to just get back to running my shop. But this is, cancel kickbacks is what it is because of the whole industry is being hurt by this. So maybe we're kind of just the lightning rod that activated it, but it was happening to everybody. And we just saw that maybe I was one of the first to figure it out and learn about it, and then started spreading the word. And what I saw is no one else was willing to or able to step up and do anything about it. So we looked at it and said, you know what, let's jump on this. Let's bring everyone together. We had the resources to build the website and do the explainer video, and we already were connected to a bunch of other retailers all over the place. So it's time for us to stand together and raise our voice, because it was too fragmented, and it just seemed really, really, really wrong. So if the whole thing's got traction, it's because of the wrongness of what was happening. So I think it's important that the industry stands together and speaks up. And, again, to the independents, even if they are participating in some small way in these, I hope they can see the big picture and demand that these value chains go away, or that their predatory pricing model isn't allowed to continue to damage everybody the way it is. So to everybody, even if your store closed, if you had a CRSA, please sign the petition. You're a victim of this thing. So I don't see why you shouldn't also put your name and your closed store behind it, because it's that, if anything, speaks more loudly than the ones that maybe are still going because you were literally a victim of it. So, so yeah, I hope everyone spreads the word. And thank you for having me on to allow me to talk about it.
Well, yeah, no, it was great having you. Yeah, please, everyone get involved. We'll have links down below to everything Owen just mentioned there, the link to the petition and the Cancel Kickbacks campaign. So please highly encourage everyone. This is an important issue. You know, we want the independent retailers to be here. And again, just thank you for the work that you're doing, Owen. We really appreciate it, and for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of High Fidelity. For access to the entire Cannabis 360 catalog, subscribe at canna360.ca or visit our YouTube channel, Canna360.